people have the resources that they need for thriving, sustainable communities all across the United States and territories. So with that, I'll pass it on to Pedro Hernandez to talk through what we're up to today.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Good morning from Fresno, California. As Olivia mentioned, my name is Pedro Hernandez, and I'm our California State Program Manager, and here to welcome you all for a very hopefully fun civics lesson. Here at Green Latinos, we wanted to provide a space and information for our membership and allies, since really budget negotiations and fights and dynamics are really the order of the last 6 months or so, and seeming as if this might be a really important dynamic for the remainder of the Trump administration. So we'll be going over three different processes in which funding is being negotiated to either support or detract from our shared community priorities. So I'll be going over the rescission process, regular order appropriations, which is just regular kind of budget setting, and also reconciliation, which is probably one of the biggest items that we've been seeing in the news as well too. We're going to be featuring two special guests as well, to talk about different environmental justice and methane items, in addition to our public lands and cultural preservation discussion as well too. So in the large arc of things, we're going to be providing you all with some action items that you can take in your communities and with your organizations as well too, to help support funding defense. So and again, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as well too. I used to be a high school teacher and love to encourage discussion as well. And we'll have a couple of built-in discussion sections as well. So without further ado, Gumya, can you get us started with the next slide so we can get this party on the way? So what the big picture is that budget and funding are being used as an attempt to roll back protections and political progress to allow for more profits and deregulation for historically bad actors. So this has been the logging industry, for the oil companies, for housing developers. So this is a process outside of the regular legislative process. So when you think of Congress, you think of usually passing laws that set policies. And this is essentially a parallel process. Many of the budget processes we'll be discussing today have different voting thresholds. So usually for legislation, it would be 60 in the Senate, for example. But for items like reconciliation, you just need a 50% plus one vote. So there are different voting thresholds, and that's why different strategies are being pursued. And again, for the big picture, environmental programs and climate justice programs are being cut to reallocate government funds to other agencies like the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Defense that further the administration's policy goals. So this is kind of cutting programs for core areas and stopping progress on one side and then moving money for a different political goal. And as we've seen, DOGE has really been prominent. The Department of Interior is now led by a DOGE official. And on the bottom left, the person with his hand raised is Russell Vogt, one of the core authors of Project 2025, and he leads the Office of Management and Budget. So the key federal agency, again, that sets the budget is led by someone who, again, wants to deregulate the government and wants to use funding as a way to attack our community. Next slide. And again, these are the three items that we'll be discussing. So appropriation funds government agencies, reconciliation adjusts revenue and spending laws broadly. And again, these are really in a nutshell discussions. And rescissions council previously approved money. So on one hand, you have a regular budget that's set annually. Reconciliation can occur once a year, potentially less frequently depending on the political makeup of Congress, and rescissions are sporadic. And I'll get into more detail of how often rescissions have been used. Um, there's different origins of these different processes. So again, in appropriations, there are different committees in the Senate and the House of Representatives. There's a broader appropriations committee that represents the entire body, and then there are different issue area committees. Reconciliation is something that's set in motion by a budget resolution, which sets broad targets to rather increase or decrease spending in different issue areas. And rescissions is can be issued from the president or Congress, but it has often been from the president. Um, there are different rules, for example, in the Senate, um, of whether or not these processes are subject to filibusters. And then again, the scope are different. So appropriations, it's broad. It's like any government need, any to fund any staffing need or any policy directive. Reconciliation is specifically related to budget related items. So things that either cost money or increase revenue for the government. And rescission is a process to withhold or redirect unused discretionary money. So again, this will be wonky, but we hope in the following slides we can build more differentiation between these different processes. Next slide. So starting off with rescissions, as I mentioned earlier, this is a cancellation of previously appropriated funds. This can be used again by presidents or Congress, but again, is often used by presidents. This must be also approved by the House and the Senate to take effect. And essentially, if you take away one thing from rescissions, is that the Trump administration has a very limited scope in its first rescission request. The first rescission request is essentially attempting to defund PBS and attempting to defund a whole suite of international aid programs. In theory, all of these, like this initial tranche of targets do affect every one of us. I think we all grew up with PBS or watching Arthur or, learning the alphabet. We all know the public good that these services provide. But these aren't necessarily like environmental programs. But why it matters to environmentalists and environmental justice advocates is that this is going to be a litmus test to see what the Trump administration can get away with. Because if this first rescission package, which did clear the House of Representatives, it still needs to go through the Senate. If this bill or if this proposal does clear, this is going to set precedent to come after different programs and different funding sources that matter to the well-being of our communities as well too. So I wanted to start off with this, just noting that this is kind of like a ongoing process in occurring under the other processes. But the next slide is another just like in-depth analysis again. And ironically enough, these graphics were provided by PBS NewsHour airing yesterday. So since the 1970s under Nixon, who illegally attempted to rescind funds, most of the presidents since then have actually attempted to use the rescission process. Again, there's about 1,200 different rescission requests that have occurred, and about 1/3 of them have actually been approved by both houses. So this is a really powerful tool, but the odds are historically that they have not been approved in a majority sense. In 2018, the Trump administration did attempt to do this for about $14 billion and did fail. But now the administration has indicated an intent to challenge the legality of the current limitations of executive powers. So this is, again, a really important litmus test, which I think everyone should be paying attention for, because the ramifications could come to our neighborhoods and our issue areas in the near future if this does pass. But I want to switch gears to the appropriations process, um, because this is kind of something that folks might regularly be familiar with. This is essentially the federal version of your city budget or your county budget or state budget advocacy that you might have been engaged in. Um, this is divided into 12 different appropriation bills based on different issue areas. And this is most, and on the federal level, this is almost a year-long process where January, February, March, the president outlines general funding priorities. This year has been unique since Trump released it in June, early June, I believe. And this process must be addressed by September 30th, the end of the fiscal year, unless there is an extension, which is called a continuing resolution. The funding that is agreed to is mandated by law to be implemented. So again, this is a really important process where both parties can increase or decrease items based on their priorities. Next slide. And so why it matters to environmentalists and conservationists here, at least for our first kind of like issue area on public lands, is that the initial draft budget for the environment proposes massive reductions to agencies and programs alike. So public lands, again, is something, whether you have a national park or a wildlife refuge directly within an hour or so drive from your community or not, these lands protect biodiversity and natural resources like air quality. They support carbon sequestration, and they provide outsized benefits for the whole country, in addition to recreation and mental health benefits. But the administration wants to slash, for example, the National Park Service by nearly $1 billion. As you might have seen in the news these last couple of months, this has been paired with the firing of hundreds and thousands of different staff across federal agencies. The Bureau of Reclamation is set to be cut by $609 million. There are research programs for the climate and ecosystem research, again, at a $564 million. And this is to increase public and government knowledge of what the current challenges to our environment are, so we can better manage them and we can better steward them, right? And so as we're all seeing the climate change impacts even on the East Coast, right? New York City was 100 degrees yesterday. We're seeing areas that have not experienced extreme heat now smash their records. And so the climate regime is changing at a faster pace than we all have predicted. And so this research is actually critical to make sure that our government can more responsibly manage these lands. For the Forest Service, right? They're proposing a nearly $400 million cut, reducing services to prioritize timber logging over biodiversity and recreation. And so what this means is that we're investing less in ecosystem stewardship, and this creates a vacuum to allow more industry presence on these lands. And so, at least for the Forest Service, as one example, when you cut staffing and when you cut management programs, this creates a slippery slope argument where they say, we don't have money to manage these lands. And so now we need private industry to manage them instead. And so this is a larger play to open up these lands for development and for oil extraction as another example. And again, we're seeing a $754 million cut in the Natural Resource Conservation Service as well, too. So together, again, and this is a very small sample size, but we hope this is like demonstrative of the broader cuts for environmental stewardship, right? This is not including the wildlife refuge system, This is not including the Bureau of Land Management. But together, the appropriations process is attempting to slash billions of dollars from environmental stewardship, which will set back the progress since we've made since the 70s when the conservation movement really began in earnest, at least in terms of federal legislation. Next slide. And flipping to another part of the page here, we wanted to kind of go in depth on one specific program that to highlight the different impacts more granularly. And why we are choosing the Historic Preservation Fund is because this is a program that supports preservation of different sites, but also natural areas that tell our nation's history. So this is a way that Green Latinos can manage our different identities as environmentalists, as people of color, as people who have a long tradition of stewarding this land of lands. And the Trump administration is also currently on a major campaign to rewrite national history. And our national parks are actually one of the only official storytelling institutions that we have here. So if you've ever been to a national park, or if you've ever been to a historic site, there's signs that tell you the indigenous history. They tell you different history components of the United States. And for example, the Blackwell School, which was added as the unit into the National Park Service, is a school in Marfa, Texas, that is a singular building, but it tells the story of segregation and race-based discrimination in South Texas against the Latino community. And so sites like this whose goal it is to make sure we don't repeat our the mistakes of our past, and just more broadly help preserve the history that we've all experienced, are really important. So the HPF provides surveying and documenting resources. This provides funds so folks can nominate sites to be placed on the National Register of Historic Places. This also funds like direct restoration and protection of historic buildings, but also supports specifically tribal communities in preserving cultural resources as well too. So this is an important program that serves all of America. Next slide though. And I took the liberty of, I think sometime last year, maybe 2023, of mapping the different Latino cultural sites in the United States. This is the current portfolio. The blue indicates state sites, the green indicates sites of national significance, and the red areas here, the red lines, indicate national historic trails. So if we just focus on the Latino community, and as just one example, we are a community that has been institutional and foundational in the development of the United States. And so these sites, again, are threatened by these budget cuts. And there are many sites that have yet to be protected or listed that are further at risk as well too, because they might lose their protection. And historic preservation, as wonky and kind of like heady as it might seem, could also be used as a way to protect a neighborhood from being demolished. This also can be used to protect your neighborhood from being gentrified. If you have a historic location or historic district or a historic monument as well too. So there can be really potent social and environmental justice implications just from historic preservation. Next slide. And so this is actually some screenshots from the proposed budget cuts for historic preservation. And as you can see from the top, The Historic Preservation Fund, um, they're seeking to reduce it by 158 million, which is practically zeroing out the program. So while there are some budget cuts like the National Park Service, which again, this 900 million um, will severely reduce its functioning, the budget is being used to completely zero out existing programs in general. So that's also something to keep in mind for relevance in your issue areas. But on the second half of the page, on the second half of the bottom, there are further complete like cuts and reductions as a whole, and they're hoping to eliminate completely different institutions like the 400 Years of African American History Commission, um, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, which helps resolve disputes between employers and unions, and also completely eliminating the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. So this is going after completely to attempt to rewrite and eliminate us from the national narrative here. And again, this is also just, yeah, no, not the libraries. And again, this is more demonstrative because they're also seeking to completely cut different environmental programs as well, too. Next slide, which I believe might be one of my last ones. This is just a more in-depth overview of the specific cuts for the Historic Preservation Fund. And on the right, I'll begin with saying that if you are interested in learning about what the specific cuts are to your issue area, now it was late, but now different budget books are available for the different agencies that you might be caring for. So for example, this is a screenshot of the budget document for the National Park Service. It's about 6 pages. It provides a very high overview. But from that document, I was able to assess that most of the programs that are funded by the Preservation Fund are going to be zeroed out if this budget does pass. For example, the African American Civil Rights Program is going to be completely zeroed out. The history of equal rights and history of underrepresented communities, Save America's Treasures, and Historic Preservation Fund projects are going to be completely zeroed out. And so again, this is just like really demonstrative that like if there are line items that you really care about, now is the time to be engaging with members of Congress to let them know that funding should not be cut, whether it's a general comment or whether it's a specific program or an agency. Now's the time. Actually, to show you how complicated things have been due to the bombings in Iran, due to the immigration protests, due to reconciliation dynamics. These processes are being delayed, and so actually, the first interior hearings for these items were supposed to be heard this week, and are likely going to be heard in mid or late July. So, in a weird way, this does extend the window for us to engage and to make sure that our priorities are heard. And again, before I transition to our next section, which is going to be more asking you what you care about, I just want to conclude with saying that budget does matter. It's kind of wonky. This is an area where I think we all can continue to engage and learn in more, but the implications are immediate. If budget cuts happen this year, you're going to feel the cuts this year. So this is the implications and real world consequences are more immediate than passing legislation and then waiting for it to be implemented, so on and so forth. So yeah, and then Jessica's also mentioning that like we come from communities that have a larger history of erasure. And so this is just a way we can preserve our history for generations to come and for generations now to enjoy. And next slide, and I believe we are set for our engagement section. right? Okay. And so that was a lot. So thank you all for bearing with me. I wanted to kind of speed through those initial sections to get to this part of like, what are what items are you currently tracking in the budget or with federal agencies, or just like what in general about this presentation or news that you've heard calls to your attention? So we have the next 10 minutes or so to get a sense of where this specific community on this webinar is resonating here. So feel free to either drop your priorities or comments in the chat. We do have some time if folks want to, speak directly to the group as well too. So feel free to raise your hand if that's the case here.
Yeah, I can jump in. Thanks, Pedro. That was a wonderful presentation, and I really liked how you broke it down into the different columns. Again, really outstanding work. Thank you. I'm Jessica, everyone at Trust for Public Land. I do federal relations for park equity. So we are tracking all of this. And really great to be here with you all in solidarity on this. Um, there's three different parts that are moving pretty quickly. One thing that we're trying to do is get the word out for people to call their members of Congress, to write, to reach out, because it's really important that they hear from us. I'm from the state of New Mexico. Most of our delegation is with us on this. But it's good that we can support them in their efforts as well, and posting on social media, um, really echoing a lot of the messages and supporting the members that are with us. Um, I don't know if any of you have heard, but in the last couple of weeks, the hunters, and there's I'll find his name, but there's a big social media influencer who's really big into hunting, and those types of groups have really come out. I know some of my family members hunt as well. But that they seem to be really influential as to getting in the ears of some of these Republicans who are pushing that. So we're tracking all of this, and again, thanks Green Latinos and all of you for educating and giving us these tools. Really appreciate it. Gracias.
Thank you, Jessica. Um, any other items that have been coming up to folks, or any other that what you want to drop in the chat, or if you have want to come off mute as well too? We have about 5 or 6 more minutes for this section, so we do have time.
Hey, great job, Pedro. Congrats. Do you know what will happen to the resource management plans if public land is sold off?
Yeah, for folks, resource management plans are, so essentially if you create a new protected area, let's say you create Pedro National Park.
Hey,
You
oh,
then have to create a resource management plan to steward it. Like, what are the specific needs of the acres that are protected? Um, so I think essentially, if you cut the staff that are intended to like implement the resource management plan, whether it's just the folks who are planning it, or whether you're cutting the programs that fund projects that again implement the RMP. Essentially, you'll have like a plan that is not being implemented. So there could be other items or other actions that Congress can take to just like eliminate the resource management plan in general. But the funding side of things really just comes down to providing the resources and staffing to actually do that work to steward the land.
I
If
see.
that's helpful.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I hope that there's not a long line for visitation at Pedro National Park. You know, hope that there's a VIP section just for us to get in.
I'll also
Uh,
have that part of the resource management plans are one way of how the agency decides how it's going to care for the resources on that land, and it extends between RMPs specifically. Lots of areas will have something like a travel management plan, which decides where roads go, what kind of travel is allowed, and etc. And at the end of the day, the existence of roads is a huge impact on the wellness of a landscape. More roads, more vehicle activity on redundant routes in across like our national grasslands, for example, will fracture habitat, can lead to the destruction of historical artifacts and culturally significant places. And so the impact will not only be to the kinds of conservation areas that could be sold off, such as an area of critical environmental concern or a wilderness study area, but also just open multiple use lands that have different levels of protection for wildlife recreation opportunities, in addition to the other uses that they might be known for through the travel management planning. And if they're sold off, like it could, worst case, it's just subject to be closed for public access, period, and the plan is thrown out the window. So little bit of complexity in the different ways that management plans guide what's happening on a particular landscape or waterscape that could be affected by any and all of this. Carlos.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos Matutes. I'm the New Mexico State Director for Green Latinos, and I kind of want to add on to or bring in what Jane asked in the chat. So specifically here in New Mexico and in Texas, we are looking at massive, hundreds of thousands of acres of federally protected lands that are being handed over to military use through the federal lands activated for the Securing the Homeland Act, which is kind of ridiculous. But just wanted to see if y'all could talk a little bit about that reallocation of resources away from protecting our natural resources to weaponizing them.
Absolutely, Carlos. I could not have asked for a better segue, actually. So yes, thank you all. Yeah, the next section actually does address some of the like reallocations as well too. So why don't we just get started then so we can save some more time for folks as well. So actually, yeah, so let's go to reconciliation. And Cumbia, can you actually go to the slide before really quick? So again, vocabulary time. Reconciliation is a special legislative process to increase or decrease government spending. There's a proposal that comes from the House of Representatives, then it's reviewed by the Senate, and then it's sent back to the House of Representatives, and if they don't agree, it keeps bouncing back and forth. Right now, this is the process where if you hear news about cutting Medicaid or cutting SNAP or other social services, this is the process that's attempting to kind of cut this as well too. And this is being used right now. Yeah, this is happening this weekend. This is a process that's being used by the Republican Party because you only need a simple majority to get this through. So you only need 50% plus one. And the Republican Party does have a majority in both the House and the Senate. So they're trying to ram this through, actually. Next slide. Again, so it passed the House of Representatives on a very slim margin, 215 to 214. And now it's in the Senate, which has different dynamics, including the Byrd rule, which can slash parts of the legislation that are not related to financial or budgetary outcomes, or subject them to a higher threshold. And again, after it's sent back, passes the Senate, it will go back to the House, and they have to agree on this. And it's very lively right now too, because Trump is telling Congress that they can't take their vacation, they can't take their recess until this is passed. And likely this will be voted on Saturday or Sunday. For folks who are monitoring this is a pain in the side, to say the least. But let's go one more slide before we get into our guest speakers here. So some of the folks who were mentioning, right, like, where is this money going to be relocated to? Part of the biggest funneling for money is for immigration reform. So as I've kind of like demonstrated with some of the resources side of things, they're cutting the park service by 900 million. Immigration actions and line items are being increased by the billions here. So this is again tied to what we're seeing right now is the tip of the iceberg. And if this reconciliation proposal does pass, we're going to see a dramatic increase. So what this means is 150 billion for border enforcement, 51 billion for border wall construction, 5 billion to the Department of Defense, 45 billion for new immigration detention centers, 27 billion for ICE enforcement, including funds to hire 10,000 officers, and 950 million for local governments to incarcerate migrants as well too. So again, like, this is not as abstract as some folks might paint it. Immigration is directly tied to the attacks on environmental deregulation. And as Carlos was mentioning, they're actually opening up protected lands on the border for military action and for border security. So there's a lot of other ways money's being funneled to, but I would say with some certainty that a majority of this funding cuts and what have you is being allocated for the administration's anti-immigrant agenda. And that said, though, we do have a couple of guest speakers to continue to add on to the different issue areas affected. So I want to make sure I make some time for them as well. So Gumia, can we go to the next slide, please? And I want to pass it to my colleague Irene, who's going to talk to us about methane dynamics here with reconciliation. So Irene, are you available?
Hello, yes, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to jump in because I know we have a lot to cover, and this is a meaty webinar, and I've learned a lot too. So thanks, Pedro. So yeah, my name is Irene Burga. I'm the Climate Justice and Clean Air Program Director at Green Latinos. So I work with Olivia and Pedro. And I want to cover, was part of what my program covers is oil and gas, and specifically how oil and gas leaks and emissions affect our climate and our public health. And so through this reconciliation process that Pedro is talking about, there is quite a bit at stake for both our climate and our public health in terms of methane emissions. And just to give a little bit of background, methane is a potent planet-heating greenhouse gas that oil and gas operators often flare or leak into the atmosphere. And so in 2022, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress passed what's called the Waste Emissions Charge, or you'll hear it as WEC, which is a part of a slightly larger program, which is the Methane Emission Reduction Program. So what the WEC does is that it requires oil and gas operators to pay a penalty fee if they exceed a certain level of methane pollution emitted. And so why is that specifically important? So each year we know that operators in the oil and gas industry needlessly waste a huge amount of methane through leaks, venting, and flaring. And so by imposing a fee on companies for each wasted ton of methane that exceeds specific thresholds, the methane emissions reduction program corrects this market failure by incentivizing operators to repair leaks and capture the gas that rather than vent it or flare it. And so this is really great for people and for American taxpayers because cutting methane waste keeps methane and co-emitted pollution out of the air, and it also raises revenue on wasted gas. And so what happened was that soon after the Biden led EPA at the end of 2024 introduced a rule implementing the waste emissions charge at the beginning of 2025. Not surprisingly, the Republican-controlled Congress under Trump voted to eliminate that rule. And now what Congress is trying to do with the reconciliation process is to get rid of the fee outright. And so the Senate Republicans want to repeal what's like called Section 136 of the Clean Air Act, and that would create a 10-year delay for the implementation of the waste emissions charge, which essentially renders it completely ineffective because a 10-year delay is pretty much erasing it. And so the Senate version of the waste emissions charge repeal, or I guess extreme delay, is essentially the same as it was in the House version. And just to give a little bit more on the key impacts, so we know that this is really important because by cutting methane pollution and other harmful pollutants, the WEC would have helped prevent asthma attacks and other health harming impacts because alongside methane, there's a ton of volatile organic compounds and toxic compounds like benzene that are emitted and are cancer producing. And the program would also have reduced an extremely, so we know that methane is an extremely strong super pollutant that's a climate warmer. Altering the WEC also will disproportionately impact communities of color and disadvantaged communities. Specifically, Latino and low-income communities are disproportionately located near oil and gas wells that contaminate the local area with toxic pollutants, leading to a lot of health impacts like heart defects, everything from infant mortality, cancer, cardiovascular disease, impaired lung function, and there's also mental health impacts that are being studied from this type of pollution, like anxiety and depression. So we know that there's data that around 1.6 million Latinos live within a half mile of the existing oil and gas facilities, and a half mile has been studied to show that that's kind of like the danger zone of being too proximate to these facilities. So in summary, it sucks that this is happening. I'm a part of a coalition called the Methane Partners Campaign, and we are working hard to get our message across to the Senate right now. We submitted a letter that had around 70 different organizational sign-ons to the Senate EPW, just, you know, telling them why this is so important for us and for our communities. And we're hoping that through the bird bath process, it can potentially go away, although we're not holding our breath. So we're just kind of watching this and monitoring it. But yeah, thank you for your time and attention. I'll turn it back to you, Pedro.
Thanks, Irene. Next slide. So now I want to pass the mic to our other special guest, Ancha. Are you available?
Hello, Pedro. Hi, everyone. I'm Ansha Zaman, and I'm the Federal Policy Director at SEED, Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy. Thank you for having me here. I feel like I've already learned so much. So yeah, really glad to be here. So at SEED, we helped convene this coalition called the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform, and it's a coalition of 6 environmental groups and 12 environmental justice groups, and so those are the 18 members. We also have a wider network of around 300 to 350 grassroots organizations that we're connected to, and the coalition essentially works to center environmental justice and federal climate policy making. And so through this budget reconciliation process, we've focused on a couple of priorities that I'm here to speak about. Speak about the narrow set of priorities that we focused on. As is evident from Pedro's presentations and Irina's presentation, there were many harmful provisions in the House-passed version of the reconciliation bill, and many harmful provisions that we're seeing in the Senate committee text, the social safety net, healthcare cuts, and the immigration provisions, and all of those have, as you all know, have an impact on EJ communities. And the members in our coalition, because all of those EJ organizations work on all of these issues. They work on immigration, they work on healthcare. So I'm preaching to the choir, but EJ is cross-cutting. So I just want to add the caveat that what we focus on as a coalition is very narrow and, of course, not comprehensive of all of environmental justice. So as EJNCP, we've focused on the cuts to the environmental justice programs that, as a coalition, we've had a history of championing and creating, and that our members are direct grantees of. And then the other big thing that we focused on is like the NEPA provisions. And essentially our goal has been to ensure that the EJ programs remain part of the conversation during floor debates, and that at least offices that consider themselves EJ champs are ready to defend these funds, these environmental justice program funds as critical funds, as public health funds. And of course, our goal has also been to ensure that our co-signatories who don't have a federal advocacy footprint remain informed, because many of them are direct grantees of these programs. So in this latest Senate EPW text, the unobligated funds in some of these programs are being rescinded. The authority for these programs was being repealed in the House version of the bill that passed, but in the Senate version, it's just that we're only seeing the rescissions of the unobligated funds, which is, I guess it's good news. The other good news is that for some of these programs, such as the Community Change Grants Program and the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, much of the funds that were appropriated through the Inflation Reduction Act have already been awarded or obligated. But for some of these programs, such as DERA, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act funds, a chunk of funds remain unobligated. So if you move to the next slide. Yeah, this just shows how much was obligated for these programs through IRA, and then sort of like a general description of what the impacts of these programs are. So to name them, we focused on the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicles Program, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act Program, the Air Pollution Monitoring Funds. And if you move to the next slide. The Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program, the Climate Pollution Reduction Act Program, and then, of course, the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grants Program, which includes the Community Change Grants, it includes the Thriving Communities program. Yeah, if you move to the next slide. Yeah, just to name, there are a couple of other harmful provisions that we haven't focused on that are also in the EPW text. And Irina went through this, the methane fee, the greenhouse gas reduction fund, that is actually being, the authority for that program is being repealed, as well as the unobligated funds are being rescinded. And then emission standards for light and medium duty vehicles. So just to name all of them. So as a coalition, we organized around a letter that ties these programs as public health programs and cuts to our public health and safety. And we were able to get around 90 signatures. we had sent around an earlier version of that text to the full house, and we're sending the new version of the letter to the Senate EPW, and I'm happy to share the final version of the letter with all of you. We also have a messaging guidance document, and our ask has been to our allies to please keep highlighting the effectiveness of these programs and why they're essential to protecting our public health.
Thank you so much for your work and that of Seed Ansha. It's so important to have as many people that we have their attention to fight back against all of these ways that emissions are harming communities. Cumbia, if you'll go over to the next slide, please. I'm going to round us out with a final review of what's up with this appropriations package and how it's affecting public land. In a nutshell, it is undoing all of the decades of law that has protected clean air, clean water, habitat, cultural preservation, amplifying and augmenting extraction of timber from our forests, of fossil fuels through mandating oil and gas leasing, coal leasing, and other harmful minerals such as uranium extraction. And so a lot's happening very rapidly with what's actually going to make it in the reconciliation bill based off of bird rule technicalities. Next slide, please. The bird rule is a rule in Congress that the parliamentarian uses to prevent provisions in the reconciliation bill that have nothing to do with the budget from being included in the package. And so there are several provisions affecting public lands, energy, resource management, wildlife, and so on that are being considered for basically being taken out of the bill because they do not pass the bird rule. These will have to have 60 votes for them to be affected by the bird rule, and these provisions that are being considered that basically might that many community members and Congress members are saying have nothing to do with the budget, have to do with NEPA, oil and gas leasing offshore within 90 days, the construction of Ambler Road in Alaska affecting indigenous communities and tribal corporations, fees on renewable energy, geothermal leasing and royalties, and natural gas exports and imports. So it's possible that Congress will say, hey, these don't pass the bird rule, they're not appropriating anything, and they'll be out of the bill. And that's a big win on numerous items in the appropriations bill. If they aren't taken out of the bill due to the bird rule, then the next option is for any provisions to be removed via legislation in the votorama that was mentioned in the chat next. Well, earlier. Next slide, please, Kumbia. There is still some provisions that folks aren't really sure if they have issues with bird rule, more on offshore oil and gas leasing, requiring 90% of the revenue from leasing in Alaska to go to the state of Alaska. Extraction on the National Petroleum Reserve affecting the Arctic Wildlife Refuge in Alaska, and then requiring coal lease applications to be expedited for approval within 90 days of a coal lease being received. So public land privatization, next slide, please, is something that I wanted to highlight for y'all, because if you're on social media and it thinks that you're somebody who cares about public land, you're probably seeing a lot of opposition to public land sell-offs, as it's being termed. I think it's really important to point out for us here and for all of the different communities that we represent is that there isn't or there's a huge gap in the focus on what privatizing public lands will do for our cultural heritage, our historic preservation as a Latino community and as community members from a wide diversity of backgrounds and heritage. So that's a really important messaging point that I want to lay out for y'all as we invite others to, or as we invite y'all to speak up on it. Because it's not over. You may have also seen that there's been some changes to the land sell-off provision put forward by Senator Mike Lee. Those changes in writing have yet to be seen, but what he tweeted was that it's not going to sell off Forest Service land. It's going to include freedom zones, whatever the heck that means. And coming from Senator Lee, that's very ominous and Orwellian. And that it would basically allow BLM lands administered by the Bureau of Land Management within 5 miles of a population center, which they probably won't define, to be privatized. They claim that it's for affordable housing, but it's a front. It's a front that is, at the end of the day, meant to obstruct public access to the places that are important for us for so many reasons, and to widen the gap between low-income people and the resources that they need. Because at the end of the day, even if they're right, and they do hold to their word that these are going to be for affordable housing, what it's going to do is economically segregate or redline poor people and unhoused people out of the heart of our cities and towns where essential resources are needed for thriving communities, out into the outskirts of our cities and towns. And we all know that affordable housing belongs in the heart of the places that we live, where there's schools, where there's hospitals, where there's transit, and other essential community resources. Public land sell-offs are majorly targeting states in the West. California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, those are states with significant Hispanic and Latino populations. And so I want to also iterate how important it is to keep saying that places where we live, places where our cultures are under attack, and not a single acre being put for sale through this process is okay, that the public is going to stand up against it. And like Carlos mentioned in the chat, Senator Lee, others who might support public land selling off, they don't care about the working people. They don't care about the poor people. They don't care about those who they're making vulnerable, because these are the same people that are trying to cut SNAP, Medicaid, separate families, and so on and so forth. So we are calling y'all to action to keep this up and make sure that these provisions, as well as others related to coal, oil and gas leasing, methane reductions, and et cetera, fail and aren't included in this bill. And if they are, that we pressure enough Republicans, especially, to vote against the bill, because it's just a political death for them, so to speak. So the first toolkit was created by Green Latinos that has some of those messaging points that I just shared with y'all, and some calls to action. It's really important time from now, basically until July 4th, which is the goal date that Congress wants to pass this reconciliation bill, to speak out loud on social media, try to earn some media from the press, whether it's like a local news station, a local radio station, or anybody creating media. Your favorite podcaster should be talking about this reconciliation bill. Your favorite YouTuber should be talking about this reconciliation bill. So use these toolkits for some tips on how to get attention and reclaim the narrative, affirming what matters for our communities. And then also mobilize your community, the followers of your organization, your group chats, your family members, to reach out to their members of Congress and tell them to either vote no on the bill and or remove some of these incredibly toxic provisions that have an outsized impact on Hispanic and Latino communities, which includes and is not limited to public lands being sold off. So 2 toolkits for you to use there. We've also created a guide, next slide please, for you to use and share with your community on calling your senators, basically asking them to address those issues of concern in the budget reconciliation bill that we've talked about today, including like the health issues, the public land issues, and then also to encourage them to support funding for the Historic Preservation Fund. I always recommend you read it out loud. You can copy and paste everything in the doc that I've shared to make sure that it sounds right to you. And then there's a link that you can click to get the phone number for your senators. Even if you have a Republican senator that you think is going to support this bill, they still need to hear from you. So please make those calls and mobilize others around you and supporting you to make those calls. Final slide is that again we have a sign-on letter in support of the Historic Preservation Fund and just the need for telling everybody stories across our public land and water. And so please consider signing your organization onto that letter. It doesn't need to be a 501c3. It could be your business. It could be a club that you're a part of, a student group. Any body of people is a great body to sign on if you have the authority to do so. And if you don't have the authority to do so, talk to somebody who can make that call. We're going to close it on July 4th and get it out to the Senate very soon thereafter. So with that, that brings the end of the presentation. Thanks so much for joining us. If you are not a Green Latinos member, we hope that you will join our membership just to stay connected with everybody here and beyond, because we have some really great ways for this conversation to continue. And we're also always itching to know what you're up to and the ways that you need support to achieve environmental liberation. So that includes the Google listservs that we have for resource and information sharing, Member Hub, a Green Latinos membership Slack, and then invitations to special events where you can get to know and meet other members of the Green Latinos community and put your priorities in the highlight. So thanks for hanging on with us 7 minutes after. I want to open up the floor for anybody who wants to comment on any reconciliation bill priorities that you have, share any resources, and we'll share them out otherwise. But with that, thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Irene. Thank you, Ansha. And that this is a good time to take off if you have nothing more to add for the conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Ramon, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing really excellent. Thank you. When do we get to comment? I just have a few comments.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's good to see you again. Listen, just wanted to ask if possible, and maybe there already is this link. So podcast, you had mentioned that earlier. I would love to know or have access to a list of podcasts across the nation that are doing progressive works and that are even related or interrelated with green Latinos, that care about the land, water, air, wildlife, and those kind of things. So I think that because I'm always trying to figure out, where the podcasters are that are talking about and trying to do, the empowerment and, education, research, resources, all that good stuff for our gente. That's number one. Number two is just consider adding as on the list of environmental impacts is getting really creative, maybe way out there or too far out there, but I think voting or civic engagement really needs to be part of any environmental or any related thing. So when we talk about land, water, air, wildlife, we should be thinking about possibly adding voter engagement, because a lot of times it comes down to, are we voting to keep or bring in people who care about the things that we care about? And they're interrelated because they can vote us up or they can vote us out like they're doing now. I mean, Trump is basically putting walls up for just about anything and everything that impacts our community, our gente. So just keep that in mind. And I'm done. Always good to see you. Everybody keep up the good work. I'm here in Toledo, Ohio, part of Lake Erie Advocates. So we're doing our work to try to keep the Lake Erie clean, safe, and drinkable and usable. Gracias.
Gracias, Ramon. We'll definitely look into that and follow up. I think those are great suggestions and I appreciate your feedback.
Orale.
All right, y'all, with that, I think we're gonna close the shop and get out of here. Watch for a follow-up message. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everybody. Take care.